Opened January 1st, 1822, the City Cemetery is the oldest continuously operated public cemetery in Nashville. Within its stone walls are the final resting places for more than 11,000 people from all walks of life, from slaves to soldiers to politicians, including 4 of Nashville's original founders. Each October, the Metropolitan Historical Commission and the Nashville City Cemetery Association host a living history tour which is open to the public. Groups are guided through the cemetery where they encounter actors portraying some of Nashville's most famous and infamous residents throughout its history. This year's tour focuses on friends and foes of America's 7th President, Andrew Jackson. We hope you enjoy the tour.
Good afternoon. My name is Dr. William Lawrence. I was born in Medford, Massachusetts, just after the American Revolution. As a younger and somewhat more handsome man, I was blessed to marry one Nancy Pomeroy Risley. After a few years together, we decided the winters there in New England were just too frightfully cold, and we relocated to Carthage, Tennessee, where I practiced medicine and farmed the rich and fertile soil. The War of 1812, I served as a surgeon with the 3rd Tennessee Militia. And just a few days before the Battle of New Orleans, the British opened up on us with a terrific cannoning that caused me to lose permanently the hearing in my right ear when a shell exploded very near to me. After the fighting was over, I walked out onto the battlefield looking for injured soldiers, and I later wrote in my diary that a person could walk on the bodies of dead British for a quarter of a mile without ever even touching the ground. I believe it was divine providence that led us to success and a lasting peace, January 8th, 1815. After the war, we lived here in the city, and even my mother, at the advanced age of 70, decided to relocate from the Northeast, and being a devout and fearless Presbyterian woman, made the 1,800-mile trip to Nashville. Well, I rented pew 83 at the Presbyterian Church so my family could all sit and worship together of our Holy Creator. Now, I can't let you go without bragging on my son a little bit. Would you believe my son, who is also a doctor, well, he is engaged to the granddaughter of the old hero of the Battle of New Orleans himself. That's right, my son John is to marry Rachel Jackson in just a few days at the Hermitage. That ceremony will be officiated by our own stalwart Presbyterian minister, Dr. Edgar. Well, I want to thank you very much for coming today and let you know how much it means to all of us. I really hope you enjoy your afternoon here at the Nashville City Cemetery.
My name is Septima Middleton Rutledge, and my lifetime spanned the years from the end of the American Revolution to the end of the War of Northern Aggression. Now, my first years were spent just outside of Charleston, South Carolina, along the Ashley River. Middleton Place was a beautiful plantation, gardens, renowned. It was a place that was worthy of my father, Arthur Middleton. He was a signer of the Declaration of Independence, you know. But I was the 7th of 9 children, and my name, Septima Sexta, is the 7th child, the 6th daughter. So there you have it. On my 16th birthday, I was married to my cousin, Major Henry Middleton Rutledge. He was sent as an emissary by George Washington to France, along with General Charles Pinckney. Now, on my wedding day, my father gave Henry also 99 slaves that were part of my dowry, and we settled in Charleston and lived there for several years. And then in some land that also Henry had gotten from his father, who was also a signer of the Declaration of Independence, included some land grants in Tennessee, 73,000 acres to be exact. And so we decided to move here in 1820. Now, it took us 6 weeks for us to travel with our 5 children to Franklin County, Tennessee, with 20 covered wagons loaded down with food and clothes and supplies. My golden harp was in one of them. We had our last 3 children were born in Tennessee. A few years later, we bought a home in downtown Nashville, and we call that Rose Hill. It was right on the banks of the Cumberland. We had rose gardens going down the back to the river and back. And we, along with our daughter Mary and her husband Francis Fogg, helped establish the first Episcopal church in Nashville, Christ Church, in 1829. Mary and I were also concerned to raise civic awareness about the need of education among destitute girls in Nashville, and so we both served on the first board of trustees for such a school. Mrs. Jackson and I bonded over our love of gardens, and she was especially devoted and gave visitors to the Hermitage small bouquets to take home with them. We were shocked at her death, and especially the general. He was overcome with grief and had to lean for support on my husband's arm to walk from the house down to her burial plot in her beloved garden. Have you been to the Hermitage? If you go there and visit, you'll see the beautiful tomb that the general had built over her grave. He joined her there 17 years later, but until then there wasn't a day went by that he did not mourn his beloved Rachel.
Fine citizens, I am William Carroll, native of Pennsylvania, but a long resident of this fair city. I'd like to tell you a little bit about my experience and my rise to political prominence in this fair state. You know, I was fortunate enough to accompany General Jackson on the Natchez expedition, and after that, General Jackson saw fit to promote me to Inspector General of his command, and I served with him throughout the Creek Wars. Indeed, the Battle of Talladega, in the forefront of the action, I had one of my finest horses killed beneath me. A few months later, the Battle of Horseshoe Bend, I was severely wounded. Now, the Battle of Horseshoe Bend was a major victory for the American forces, indeed a very major victory for Tennessee, and so the United States government saw fit to promote General Jackson into the regular army. And I was fortunate enough to follow him as commander of the Tennessee militia. Indeed, at the Battle of New Orleans, that glorious 8th of January, I would lead our Tennesseans to victory over the British forces on January the 8th, 1815. Now, soon after that, I returned to Nashville, and the fine citizens of this state saw fit to elect me governor, a position I have now held for 12 years. And under your current laws, I'm quite confident that no one will surpass me in being governor any longer than I have.
All this talk of Jackson's work here in Tennessee, why, I'm the one that brought him here. I was appointed judge of the Miro District by no less than President Washington himself, and I chose a young Jackson as the public prosecutor. I gave him his first big job in 1788, a few years before you arrived, Reverend.
Oh yes, I came in 1801, sent by the Presbytery of Kirkcaldy, Scotland, to preach to the Scots seceders. I was educated at the University of Edinburgh. When I first came to Tennessee, there were no more than half a dozen houses out here. By 1814, I was preaching at the Presbyterian Church.
Yes, your reputation precedes you, Reverend. I've heard it told that you performed the marriage ceremonies of most everyone in town.
When you're in this sort of work, it allows you to meet most everyone. I remember I was there on the 4th of July, 1822, when William Carroll presented the sword to General Jackson. I provided the invocation at the ceremony. The sword was a gift from the state of Tennessee for the Battle of New Orleans victory. What a grand day!
Yes, I remember that. The newspaper said it was the biggest crowd ever assembled in the city. After the ceremony, and your benediction, of course, we all traveled to My Springs for a barbecue.
What a faithful man, the general. He gave the land at the Hermitage to build the church, so his wife wouldn't have to travel the 12 miles into town. The neighbors in Jackson built a handsome church, and I officiated the dedication in 1823.
Many say that the general wasn't a learned man, but a letter to his wife would say otherwise. He wrote, "I am truly happy that our church is almost finished, and that a pious and good man, Dr. Hume, is to dedicate it. If such a man's prayers cannot obtain a blessing upon the neighborhood, then I would despair of the efficacy of prayer from any other." You were also there when Mrs. Jackson died.
Oh yes, I believe it to be one of the saddest days we've known, to see the general grieve so. I gave the eulogy at the funeral. She had a heart to feel and a hand to relieve the poor and the needy.
Good afternoon. My name is Josiah Nichol, and I was born in 1772 in the County Donegal in Ireland. And in 1790, I emigrated here to the United States, where I went to live in Virginia, specifically Saltville, Virginia, where I engaged in salt refining, moved to Knoxville in the early part of the century, and started several stores there in the city itself and the towns thereabout. This is my daughter Margaret, by the way, Margaret Armstrong, and she and I have a little story to tell you. But in 1809, our family moved to Nashville and built a home, a rather large home, if I say so myself, at the corner of Cherry Street and Union Alley. Margaret, why don't you take it from there?
Okay, sure. Our home was the center of social life in Nashville. Andrew Jackson's law office, it was close by here. My mother and father were the founding members of the Presbyterian Church and very close friends to the Jacksons. When I fell in love with a brave soldier, my father was not very pleased.
That is an understatement.
And he should be around here somewhere. His name is Lieutenant Robert Armstrong, and he was in charge of the artillery at the Battle of Anita-Chocopo. And as you probably have heard, he saved the day.
Well, Margaret and Robert eloped, much against her mother's and my wishes. And they eloped to the Hermitage, where my good friend Andrew Jackson and his bride Rachel lived. And shortly after they eloped, we were of course furious, General Jackson wrote me a letter, and here's what he said. "I have the pleasure to inform you that Captain Armstrong and his lady," that's Margaret, "are now with me, united in the holy bonds of matrimony. I hear that this union did not meet with your approbation." Well, we've already mentioned that. However, Captain Armstrong is honest, brave, he is enterprising, without a cent of property. Is worthy of any lady, though, and any family, and any fortune. So,
General Jackson did invite mother and father to dinner on the coming Friday at the Hermitage, and they were living in the log cabins then. My parents accepted, and I was forgiven.
well, thereafter, Chris Jackson had been my friend before this happened, and friend during this, and friend afterwards. He went into politics after the war was over. We were on the opposite sides of most political issues. I was a Federalist and then a Whig, and he was a Democratic Republican who became a Democrat. The parties changed their names in those days. But nonetheless, I remained his financial advisor throughout the time that he was in Nashville and during the time he was in the national capital in Washington. He and I differed openly on the issue of the Bank of the United States, which I will not bore you with the issues on the subject, but notwithstanding that, we remained friends until the end.
Father and President Jackson did not fall out over the bank issue because father was struck down with cholera and died in 1833.
Well, thank you very much for your time. I hope you enjoy your stay here in the cemetery. And I think you'll see Captain Armstrong down there. He'll give his side of the story.
Hello, my name is Robert Armstrong, and I was born in Virginia in 1791. And about the age of 20, I moved from Abingdon to Nashville, and I began my military career in 1814 when I joined a company of artillery under General Andrew Jackson, and we served with him as we moved against the creek down in the Southern Territory. After that, the general saw fit to make me one of his aides-de-camp in the campaign for New Orleans. But also with us there was Major Jeffrey Locklear, and he's here today. Major, it's good to see you again, sir.
Lieutenant? And oh yes, Lieutenant, I remember very well that the general said that you saved the day at the Battle of Chappaquiddick.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
And you had the Nashville Volunteers under your command.
Yes, sir.
And I remember also that you were able to get the cannon on the top of the creek and repel the Creek Indian attack with grape shot.
Yes, sir. I remember that.
I was there, and you were wounded.
Yes, sir, Major, I was. I wasn't the only one, though. I remember, memory serves me correct, we had about 100 men struck down between Amuckfall and Anita Chopico, but I wanted to save the cannon. But, you know, with those things behind us, Major, do you remember we came back to Nashville? You remember the grand dinner they had at the Bell Tavern?
Yes, and also I remember when the general called again, we followed him all the way to New Orleans,
yes,
and we followed him all the way to victory.
Yes, sir.
And it was January the 8th, 1815.
That's right, Major.
Yeah. You know, I continued to serve with the general until the first Seminole War.
Yes, sir.
But, you know, Lieutenant, I am just so thankful and pleased that you would invite me to live with you at your home with your wife.
Yes, sir.
And the general visited me there, you know.
Yes, he did.
He only made 3 trips home when he was the president. But for him to go out of his way to come to visit me on my sick bed, what an honor that was.
Yes, sir. It was. It was. You know, the general honored me too. You know, he bequeathed me his sword, the very sword he carried through the Creek campaign, all the way through the War of 1812, the one he held right by his side at the Battle of New Orleans. It was an honor. And Major, it's been so great to see you again today, sir.
Thank you, Lieutenant.
I'm Joseph Norville. My father served in the American Revolution, but I did not follow in the family tradition of military service. I was born in Kentucky, where my father had received a Revolutionary War land grant and lived there until I was a young man, at which point I moved to Nashville and soon began publishing the Nashville Whig with my brother Moses Norville. We reported in that paper in 1815 of the great victory at New Orleans, in which 13 Americans were killed, 39 wounded, 19 went missing. On the British side, 400 died in the field, another 500 died from wounds sustained. Now, in Nashville, I served as treasurer of the Board of Aldermen for the city and in a number of other posts, including publisher of the American Presbyterian paper. I found it very rewarding to serve in any way that I could, humbly for my fair city. And staying busy in life is an important thing as it keeps one out of trouble. Now, I got to know General Jackson from our involvement with the Masons. Each of us in turn served as Grand Master of the Masons. I also served as Grand Treasurer for a time. Now, this collar, this Masonic collar that I wear, was presented to me when I became Grand Master of the Masons of Tennessee, and I was honored to have served in such capacity. Now, when General Jackson joined his wife in the afterlife, I was asked to serve as an honorary pallbearer at the funeral, which I did, which I gladly did. He died at the age of 78 in 1845. He was a true friend of mine, and I miss him very much. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Captain Alpha Kingsley, born in Woodstock, Vermont in 1778. Joined the United States Army in the 1st Infantry in 1799, where I served until 1815. Was stationed at Fort Southwest Point over in Roane County in East Tennessee, where I met Eliza Ayers.
Yes, we actually, the captain and I were the founders of the First Presbyterian Church here, some of the people that began that church. And that's how I met Miss Jackson. She and I became very good friends through the love that we had of the church and of the ministry that we had here. And that just really cemented our friendship, was through the church.
As a matter of fact, you and Miss Jackson wrote to each other frequently, confidants, if you will. Didn't she write to you while she was in Washington?
She did, she did. She wrote me a letter when she went to Washington for Lafayette's tour, and of course the general just made her go with him. She dreaded the journey so very much. It was 28 days to get to Washington. But once she got there, she said the extravagance was grand. There were parties and dresses, but that they also had churches of every denomination there. They were able to attend Sabbath and attend it well there in Washington. So the captain became the sexton of this cemetery. We raised our children here in 1822 when the city cemetery began. He became the sexton and was a big part of laying out the roads that you see today and the different plots for the families. So we thank you for coming to visit us.
My name is Charles Dickinson, and I was born in Maryland, where horse racing is a gentleman's sport. After completing my study in law, I moved here to Nashville, Tennessee, where I met my beautiful wife, Jane. My father-in-law, Joseph Irwin, was a wealthy man with a large plantation. He enjoyed horse racing as much as I do. There's good money to be made at the races. But in the fall of 1805, we had a race scheduled at Jackson's racetrack known as Clover Bottom. My father-in-law was forced to withdraw his horse, Plowboy, from the race and pay a fine for forfeiting. He quickly paid the fine, and the race was rescheduled for 6 months later. When we arrived at the racetrack that day, Jackson's horse Truxton was limping badly. We thought he might withdraw his horse, but he did not and eventually went on to win the race. Jackson and his friends won $10,000. My father paid, and I quickly left to go on a trip to New Orleans. I was gone for several months. While I was gone, I wrote my wife, asked her to tell my boy where we were and to kiss him goodnight for me. But when I returned to Nashville in May, I found my whole world had been turned upside down. Jackson has accused me of speaking ill of the last horse race, as well as his wife Rachel, and he has challenged me to a duel. I have accepted, and based on the gentleman's agreement of a duel, because I received the challenge, I have the right to choose the weapons, and I have chosen pistols. The duel will take place in Kentucky on May 30th.
My name is Ephraim Foster. I was born in 1794 near Bardstown, Kentucky. When I was a small child, my family moved here to Nashville. I began my studies and graduated from Cumberland College when I was just 19 years old. Began to study law. My legal career was hampered in some degree by my temper. I got so mad one time I even threw a book at the judge. And can you believe he tried to hit me with his cane?
My name is Dr. John Shelby, and I've been told I was the first white child born in Sumner County in 1786. But I do know this: my parents were wealthy enough to send me to school at the University of Pennsylvania, where I studied medicine, and my dissertation was on bullet wounds, which is one of my favorite things to study. Now, when I heard about the terrible massacre at Fort Mims, I joined the call of volunteers and joined General Jackson to head down south to fight for our country as a medical officer. Unfortunately, while I was there, I was injured in the eye, where I lost the sight in this eye, which did hamper a bit me doing surgery because my depth perception is quite off, but I still continued my medical career.
I joined the Tennessee Militia as a private secretary for General Jackson. After returning to Nashville, I continued my law studies, was admitted to the bar, and opened a law practice. I was very loyal to Old Hickory at all times in all his endeavors. I even gave the oration at the Presbyterian Church when he was given the ceremonial sword from the state of Tennessee commemorating the Creek War. Also, having good friends as well as a long legal career allowed me to go to the state capitol twice and serve as Speaker of the House both terms. I also went on to the U.S. Senate, where I proudly served Tennessee for 2 terms and eventually ran for governor, but my bid was unsuccessful. The General and I sadly parted ways when I supported Hugh Lawson White for the presidency as opposed to Martin Van Buren, his candidate.